Mr. Chair, item 1 is HCID and CEO reports relative to authorization to negotiate and execute contracts with RIDEC Computer Professionals and 3DI for information technology professional services in an amount not to exceed $1.5 million for each contract.
Item 4 and 6.
Item 4 is a CAO and HCID report and resolution relative to the issuance of $14 million in tax-exempt multifamily conduit bonds for the Winnetka Senior Apartments project. Item 6 is an HCID report relative to authorization to execute a contract with Intuitive Real Estate Solutions, LLC, to provide property management services.
We don't have a quorum there, so we'll have to just communicate it.
Right. So those 3 items are items of consent. We don't have a quorum, but we'll note that, and when they come back, we will make that matter official.
Okay, that brings us to item 2, HCID and CAO report relative to authorization to execute a First Amendment to contract with Urban Futures Bond Administration for an additional amount of $710,000.
Okay. Can we get housing to come up? Go ahead.
Good afternoon, Councilman. Brett Apershaw from the CIO's office. This is a transmittal, as he said, to execute a First Amendment with Urban Futures Bond Administration. They provide occupancy monitoring services for the city's affordable housing inventory. The amendment is to extend the term by 12 months and add $710,000. This office concurs with HCID's request to execute the First Amendment. I'm available for any questions, as well as Britannia.
Okay. Go ahead.
Thank you. I'm also available here from HCID, Britannia Murillo, if there's any questions.
Where's is Urban Futures here?
No, they're not.
Okay, then can you, Mr. Fuentes, questions?
No, I would second the motion, Mr. Chair, as soon as we have a quorum, but you only have one provider that does this function for the city, right?
That's correct.
Or HCID, rather, and you've gone through the process. Were there any sort of objections or hang-ups in the process along the way?
No, sir. We had a RFP process where we had a bidders conference, and we posted it on Babin, and there were 2 applicants, and this is the contractor selected with the highest score.
Fantastic. Yeah, and when we get a quorum, I'd be happy to make this motion to move the item.
I'm pleased to do that also, but I'd like to get a report from them, if not from you, on where we are with respect to the covenants. Some report that tells us how many are in need, how many units we have, and what the study's been.
There's a total of approximately 20,000 units that are being monitored that currently had HCID covenants, and we're also transitioning the additional 23,000 units that were acquired, taken on from the CRA, the former CRA.
23,000 taken on from CRA?
Correct.
Wow. That's a lot.
Still not enough, though.
Yeah. That's why we can't lose them.
Yeah.
Do we have public comment? No public comment?
No cards on this item.
Okay. What I'm going to ask is we adopt the CAO report and then request that you come back with a report on compliances for the last 3 years.
A status on compliance
Yep.
for the last 3 years. We can do that.
Okay. All right.
That brings us to item number 3, which is a HCID and CAO report relative to authorization to negotiate and extend for an additional 10 years the term of 2 loan loss agreements between HCID and the Corporation for Supportive Housing and New Generation Fund.
Okay.
Good afternoon,
Yes.
Councilmember Fuentes, Mr. Chair. My name is Nicholas Campbell with the CAO's office. The item before you is a request from Housing to negotiate and execute amended and restated loan agreements with the Corporation for Supportive Housing and the New Generation Fund, LLC, to continue the loan operations of the Supportive Housing Loan Fund and the New Generation Fund. The amended loan agreements will extend the term of each contract for 10 years to January 3rd, 2025 for the Supportive Housing Loan Fund and May 16th, 2028 for the New Generation Fund. These two funds provide pre-development and acquisition loans for rental housing projects in the city. The Supportive Housing Loan Fund for supportive housing projects and the New Generation Fund for affordable housing projects. Housing's loan of $5 million to the Supportive Housing Loan Fund and $10 million to the New Generation Fund have been used to leverage substantial lending capital from other sources and support more than 40 rental housing projects. Additionally, the funds are fully intact as none of the projects financed by either the Supportive Housing Loan Fund or the New Generation Fund have lost any money or defaulted. There is no impact to the general fund, and this office concurs with the recommendations of the department. I am available for any questions. Thank you.
Shall I make a few additional comments from the
Yes,
department?
please.
Thank you. Helmy Hitzrick, Assistant General Manager. Is this on? No. Thanks. Helmy Hitzrick, Assistant General Manager for Housing Development. One of the most important things, relationships that we can have in the department is with mission-driven nonprofit organizations, and in this case, we're partnering with community development financial institutions that have a mission to provide capital to affordable housing developments in the city. The two funds are, one fund, the New Generation Fund, we partner with Enterprise Community Partners, and the Supportive Housing Loan Fund, we partner with Corporation for Supportive Housing. They're two separate funds that provide a pipeline of new development deals into the managed pipeline. The Supportive Housing Loan Fund primarily focuses on providing acquisition and pre-development capital for supportive housing, and the New Generation Fund provides acquisition and pre-development for a broader array of housing types, including senior housing and mixed income housing and family affordable housing, and offers a larger amount of capital for those loans than a developer typically can get through a community development financial institution. The CDFIs have brought into partnership with the city a consortium of banks who provide the private capital, and our role is to provide a loan loss reserve to the fund. It's been highly successful and created a lot of liquidity for acquisition and pre-development that has been instrumental in bringing projects into the pipeline. I would just add that in the past, the CRA, the redevelopment agency, provided approximately 80% of the redevelopment pre-development and acquisition funding in the city, and now that the CRA is gone, there's ever increasing demand for the funds for these funds because that source of funding no longer exists. So this is really one of the most important sources of capital for acquiring land and allowing affordable housing developments to have pre-development funds and acquisition funds.
Well, the additional 10 years, the extension, would it... on the natural, I guess it means because we've got the program going and the capital that we'd get more projects. But can you measure how many more we would get? I think it's sort of hard to do. I'm just wondering.
Actually, we spend a lot of time doing that, and I'm not sure. I don't know off the top of my head, and maybe Manuel can speak to the number of projects. We are continuing to look at different strategies for lending. So the historic pipeline has been on both funds, the 9% low-income housing tax credit project, and because of the lack of takeout resources, we're looking at using as funds for projects that don't require 9%, so stabilizing the preservation of affordability through the use of this fund as acquisition and rehab money with a perm takeout source of a mortgage. And that will increase the number of and type of projects that we can do. We do anticipate proposing within the budget an additional $5 million for the New Generation Fund to expand our work in that area, but we are still doing the underwriting analysis with Enterprise and the banks.
Got it. Well, now that we've got a quorum, I'd be happy to make a motion as well on this item as well as I did on 2. And since we're at it, I'd move the consent calendar 2, Mr. Chair, whenever you're ready.
one full sweep.
What's on that consent, if I may ask?
Items 1, 4, and 6.
Okay. Any other questions, any other comments? We're going to take a break from this item, and is that okay? Move to vote on the consent and item 2.
Mr. Chair, there was, since the committee only has 3 members, there was actually a quorum with 2 members when the committee started, so.
Oh, that's right. We're down to 3, that's right. My apologies.
So
It's okay.
we will be ready to move on. If you wanted to move on from item 3, we could move on to item 5. Or did you want to vote on item 3?
What I want to do, let's finish this item, and then we'll vote on all of them at one time.
Okay.
Okay? So you're saying this is unnecessary because we actually did it before?
Well, yes, since the
There was a
committee started
quorum.
with a quorum.
I misspoke, and there was in fact a quorum, and we actually did.
Yeah, I made a mistake. I forgot we dropped 2 members.
Okay. So we're good to go. We're on item 3. Any, Mr. Price, did you come in with any questions on item 3?
Let's see, I don't think so.
Mr. Chair, we also have speaker cards on item 3.
We do. I want to see if the council member has any questions.
I don't have any questions. Just
Okay. We've got 2 speakers. We've got, is it Molly Reisman? Molly Reisman? Well, Molly?
Good afternoon. I'm Molly Reisman, Los Angeles Director for Corporation for Supportive Housing.
If you could move that,
Is this moving
that's the
forward?
bad one, yeah. So, yeah, move that one over to your left.
There we
Yeah,
go.
Perfect.
There we go.
Great.
So again, Molly Reisman, Los Angeles Director for Corporation for Supportive Housing, and I just wanted to thank the city for your prior support of the Supportive Housing Loan Fund. We're both very honored to be a part of this public-private partnership and very proud of the fund's results. As reported, the fund has contributed to the creation of over 1,400 supportive housing units and over 600 affordable housing units in the last 7 years. And we've had an amazing partnership with HCID. They have been very creative and innovative with this fund, and we're very excited to see it continue. Well, we're very proud of the results, which have created supportive housing in all 15 council districts, which I'm not sure we knew was possible at the beginning of the fund 7 years ago. There continues to be extraordinary need for more supportive housing throughout Los Angeles, as we all know. So we're very excited to have the fund renewed and looking forward to partnering with the city on its continued implementation.
Thank you. Questions? Jacqueline Wagner, Enterprise Community Partners, Inc.
Good afternoon. Thank you. I'll be brief. My name is Jacqueline Wagner. I'm the Deputy Director of Southern California for Enterprise Community Partners. As Helmy mentioned, we're a national intermediary that provides technical assistance and financing for affordable housing. We've had a long-standing relationship with HCID, and the New Generation Fund is a tool to help advance the city's priorities, so we've been working closely with Rushmore, Helmy, and Manuel to do that. And since the fund's inception, we've invested about $66 million and built about 1,200 affordable housing units, and this extension allows us to do more. That number hopefully is much bigger over the next 10 years, but we appreciate your continued support and allowing HCID to kind of drive the city's priorities of affordable housing.
Thank you.
how much did you say over the past number of years? 6 million?
$66 million has been invested, roughly 1,200 units.
I have Yolanda, on this matter, is this number 3, Yolanda Gonzalez, Coalition for Apartment Owners.
Yolanda Gonzalez, and I'm an apartment owner for Boyle Heights and several districts of the city. I'm glad this subject came up because I was one of the main coalition that geared to dissolve the CRAs because of money not going properly to help us in our buildings. And some of our wonderful representatives declared our areas blight and plight, which made it very difficult to get lending. Instead of going to the bringing in new partners, why don't you partner with us? We have the properties. We can go up 2 more stories in one of my buildings, instead of getting new people where we know the money is not going to be funded properly. We're already there. And if you're going to apply to us that we have to retrofit, my father was the king of retrofitting in Mexico City after the earthquake. It's not going to be easy. And I don't know how I'm going to get a loan because my husband and I are retired, and they're not going to lend us anything. But if you're willing to partner with us and to get more housing, partner with those that we exist already in order to improve our buildings. Just an idea. I think you should put it up because that money's not going to be funded properly, and you guys made a lot of money and a lot of payments went out to the CRA, and you used us for money to be funded somewhere else.
Thank you. Gloria?
Dabs, man, I can't read my writing.
Coming up.
Good afternoon. I want to say that I too think that, and I don't know if they use the CRA or not, because I'm not familiar with that, but I really do think that people that are under rent control, that this, for affordable housing, for instance, in Venice, the affordable housing on, and I hate to say it, Lake Street, that's $2,500 a month. That's not that affordable unless you work as a very high-level executive in Sony or someplace like that. But if you gave loans to people who own buildings already with the knowledge that they have to freeze the rents for a certain amount of money, if you can maybe take some of the places that are allowed to be, are reasonable with the housing department to take out a REAP, to give some low loans for freezes once again on our rents when they come up to standards. Maybe that way we can have some affordable housing. Maybe that way we can improve some neighborhoods. Maybe that way the broken window theory will happen in a reasonable and a productive way as opposed to a negative way.
And more affordable, too.
And more affordable.
It's already
And maybe
built.
the children then, maybe we can do something like with skate parks and neighborhoods, and maybe the kids can have to do a certain amount of homework to use the skate park. I'm thinking of things like that. If owners would give back that way, participate, do certain hours. I really hope that this committee will consider partnering with existing homeowners in some of the ways that I've presented. And I thank you for your time.
Thank you. Okay. Any other cards? Okay. Mr. Fuentes, Mr. Price, any comments?
Nope.
Okay. So let's adopt the CAO report.
So moved.
So moved.
Mr. Chair, just for clarification, did the committee approve items 1, 4, and 6 on consent?
Yes, we did when we were at the
Very good.
two-thirds status.
Would you like to move on to item 5 at this time?
Yes.
Item 5 is a motion Fuentes Corretz regarding illegal units discovered each year by HCID and relative matters.
Yes. Let's hear from Mr. Fuentes.
Great, thank you, Mr. Chair. I was hoping that we could hear sort of the comment cards on item 5, if it's okay with the chair. So this way it'll inform the conversation and maybe even the instruction to staff. So if we can go to public comment first, and then we'll take it from there.
Okay. Bill Huey. Yolanda Gonzalez. David Scheinfarb.
Yeah, sit here and I'll just give you the mic.
Here, I'll let David go first. Let him go first.
Okay.
Yeah, good afternoon, members of the Housing Committee. My name is Bill Huey. I'm president of Fair Housing Coalition. We're a civil rights group for landlords. a lot of landlords who own older buildings, and they're not collecting fair market value rent, they're collecting 40 or 35% fair market rent. They don't have the cash flow to fix up the buildings, and the city comes along, puts them in REAP. And we find out that some of these buildings were subdivided in the 50s and 60s. Somebody took a two-bedroom apartment and made two one-bedroom apartments, way before the landlord ever owned it. So regarding these illegal units, I think if the unit is safe, and maybe there's a discrepancy, it's not 6 feet away from the property line or something minor, it should be approved. There should be an approval process, and the landlord shouldn't be hit with some $20,000 fee to approve it, because these are people that are providing affordable housing to low-income people, and sometimes the city does more damage than good, because in the last 15 years we've lost 40% of our low-income units because of all the REAP and the SCEP and everything like that. The housing department has to be more fair-minded towards landlords. We're not the bad guys here.
Okay. Yes, sir.
Good afternoon. My name is David Scheinfarb. I'm a very small property owner, and wanted to bring three types of things to your attention. One is I have a particular unit that I bought, basically the only one I own, many years ago, and it had a illegal subdivision from a one-bedroom to two singles. And it's passed several inspections over the years, and now all of a sudden the inspector came and said, no, it's illegal and you have to remove it. So this brings up a couple problems. One is I don't understand why the city, in the interest of looking out for its citizens, would want to remove a $750 apartment that's affordable to some young person that just comes out of college or is going to junior college, which is right down the street in Hollywood. Why would they would think that is in the council's best interest or the city's best interest to remove that? The other is that the cost to make that legal is almost $80,000. I talked to an architect and a general contractor, and in order to get the it's just not cost effective. So we'll just remove it from the market, and then you have one less unit that's affordable to someone who's looking in that price range. And I think it's in the best interest of everyone to make a provision to allow it to continue.
Great.
Mr. Chair, I would just remind the speakers to be mindful of the clock here.
Yes, sir.
Yolanda Gonzalez, also a small apartment owner building, and I'm going to put you a perfect example as to what David was saying. I'm trying to improve my building in Venice, and because we're governed by a specific plan, a coastal commission plan, and a community plan, it makes it even more difficult. I'm just trying to improve a 14 by 4 improvement onto my building, and I'm up to $5,000 in cost just to get the fees. Now they're requesting me to get the original certificate of occupancy, which they couldn't find because it was under another property. Plus, I have to pay an $850 fee to the Coastal Commission. I have to pay a green fee. And you know what? You're just marking us out of the. We are in a service business, an apartment giving people a way to have a living and a place to live. And you know what? You need to review what you're doing to us instead of attacking us.
Thank you. Carlos Aguilar. Jim Clark. And Harold Greenberg. And Mr. Millman, why don't you guys all come up?
I'll share with Mr. Millman.
Yes.
Well, you can't even speak, so.
All right, I'll start. We could share. Good afternoon. My name is Carlos Aguilar. I'm the Director of Organizing for the Coalition for Economic Survival. And as tenant advocates working in the community, we know that there are a number of multi-family housing properties that have been illegally converted, that are illegally converted units. Typically, these units have been in existence for a number of years, but have been discovered by the city during routine and complaint inspections by HCIDLA and Building and Safety. Given that the city faces an increasing housing shortage and the likelihood that these illegally converted units have existed for a number of years, it would be in the best interest of the city to work with landlords to expedite the process in order to bring the units into compliance with all applicable city laws. This process could include ensuring that the units meet all habitability and safety codes requirements while waiving some procedural requirements such as getting a variance or providing parking spaces. CES supports the development of an ordinance that preserves these units as safe, habitable, and affordable. The goal of the ordinance would be to maintain the existing tenants' rights while allowing the legalization of units to be done in a timely and cost-effective manner to the landlord, which will create better likelihood that the tenants can remain in the dwelling upon completion of the necessary safety and habitability and other requirements. We urge you to adopt the motion today. Thank you. Sorry about that.
Mr. Greenberg.
Harold Greenberg. Good afternoon, gentlemen. Harold Greenberg, Agla. A tenant without a landlord is homeless. A landlord without a tenant's bankrupt. And I think what the gentleman here has just said shows we've come together, the tenants' rights advocates, the apartment advocates. It's a win-win position. We're preserving affordable housing for low income. In addition to that, the tenants, many of them have been there 20, 30, 40 years. They don't want to leave. They want to stay. There isn't anything to take their place. So we want that. With the landlord, he's not going to have to look over his shoulder. It is a win-win position. One, we will be waiving certain requirements where we can legalize it. The city will win because they'll have affordable housing. There will be fees, of course, there, and we will be using licensed contractors. You're creating jobs. This legislation has put the tenants' rights advocates together with the apartment industry. We're working together as a team, and I request that this pass today. It works particularly through the offices of the Housing and Community Development Department. I thank them for their assistance on this. Thank you, gentlemen.
So I guess now I know why he's one of the best attorneys in the city. Jim Clark, Executive Vice President of the Apartment Association of Greater Los Angeles. Without having to repeat what Harold just said, I can't. But I do want to thank you, Council Member Felipe Fuentes, for authoring this motion. We really appreciate that, and we would appreciate that the committee as a whole, Mr. Chair, and the now diminished committee, I guess, you're down to 3. We would hope that you would pass this motion and have the process expedited with everybody at the table to create a very positive ordinance and program that would keep people in their apartments and keep those registered units in the hands of the owners that are renting them now. Thank you very much, and we urge you to support and pass this motion.
Try to get my maybe I don't have my voice. No, I'm fine. I'm fine. No, I'm fine. I thank everyone for your wisdom, your courage, and your insight. Let's start with the apartments, but let's get the garages and the granny flats as well. Those are death traps. We need to move forward and get them all. You leave one illegal, dangerous garage up, you're going to kill more kids. So let's start here, but don't go to sleep. Let's come back and get them all. Thank you. That's it.
Yeah. So let me begin by thanking you, Mr. Chair, and Mr. Price for what's going to be an awful lot of work ahead of us here with this motion. The motion that we introduced really, I think, is twofold. The first part is actually pretty easy. The first part speaks to the systematic code enforcement program and its results, and will hopefully give us at least an understanding as to sort of what's out there in terms of these types of violations, so that we can figure out how to conform these illegal units in a way that is safe, but also hopefully works within the envelope of the buildings that are currently out there, so that we can improve our housing stock numbers. The hard part, though, is going to be how do you do that? Because I don't think that there's necessarily a common denominator when you look at these particular situations. And if there were, this is going to be very easy. But it's my sense that a lot of this may be complicated by geography and the parts of the city of Los Angeles and sort of the code. And so it brings me to thank all of you, the stakeholders, for having worked with the department for as long as you have in having this conversation, because it is, I think, a really important moment for us to recognize that tenant right organizations as well as property owners and landowners agree that we have to conform these illegal units. And I think that's really, really important. But again, the hard part, colleagues, is going to be how it is that we work within the envelope that we have before us. And there will be some situations, unfortunately, where on balance it may not work out necessarily, where relocation might be in the interest of the property owner as opposed to sort of trying to engineer something that won't work. And our hope is that we can find situations that work. So with that, I'd like to invite the staff to come up, who will be charged with, I think, that the hard part of this is coming up with a recommendation for all of us in a report on how to proceed. And if I could have the housing department, I know that building and safety is not going to be in attendance today. They unfortunately are dealing with the fire, although I think there are some representatives from the department. If you all could come up a little bit and help us understand sort of what it is that we know. We do have a systematic code enforcement program in place. We have a sense for sort of what we know about illegal units, at least the ones that have come to our attention. And I think that will inform at least the path forward as it relates to the report that will be coming back sometime in the first quarter of next year. So with that, I invite the Housing Department to begin, if it's okay.
Good afternoon, council members. Anna Ortega with the Housing and Community Investment Department. I'm the Director of Rent Stabilization, and in that capacity, we've been facilitating for over a year meetings between landlords and tenant representatives who are very interested in this idea in finding a way to legalize non-conforming units and still in a way that provides protections to tenants within the parameters of the rent stabilization ordinance. So they've worked a long time on this. They've come a long way on agreeing on certain basic ideas for how this should be done and are eager to proceed to the next phase with the assistance of city staff.
So is there, why don't we sort of begin a little bit with, I know that we're eager to proceed, but just understanding a little bit from what you heard from some of the testimony today, sort of ideas in terms of how we shape this report. I think the hardest part, if it's okay to sort of point out for the planning department, I think from a building and safety perspective, we're pretty rigid. I mean, whatever is life safety issues, they are what they are. We're not going to sort of try to figure out how to get around those because we simply can't do that. From a housing perspective, I think that we could get creative, but I think the hard part is how it is that we operate within the existing land use zone. And, you know, to be absolutely honest and fair, if we are going to make some accommodations to folks who have not conformed, whether it's by their knowledge or lack of knowledge, there is going to have to be something that the city of Los Angeles is going to have to get in return in order for us to do this. Because what we're really talking about, colleagues, is setting up a pilot amnesty program for these units. And there are folks who have operated with full knowledge of their situation, and they've done it in a way that is conforming with the law. And again, there are some out there that either by discovery or by their acknowledgement, but probably in many cases not real knowledge of the situation that they bought, are not conforming with law. So I think the sticky part's going to be from the planning perspective, and I wanted to see if there's at least some initial thoughts as to how it is that we proceed.
Sure. Good afternoon, council members. Matthew Gillespie, the Department of City Planning. I'm in our citywide policy section working on housing issues. I think you've hit it on the head. A lot of these issues are going to come down to planning and zoning, just not conforming with existing density, existing parking requirements, existing open space requirements, what have you, things in our zoning code. And wanted to say that the planning department is in support very much of the goal of this motion to look into ways to preserve viable units that can be. In fact, we have a program in our housing element, which was recently adopted, just almost mirroring this exact language, talking about identifying zoning barriers and working for ways to see if they can be modified. But the devil is in the details and how you do that and how you don't incentivize folks doing illegal things in the future. There are existing mechanisms in the code that sort of around affordability, around transit access, where there is a framework to provide certain zoning benefits in exchange for affordability under the density bonus. It's quite a powerful incentive. You can probably make most of these projects work. Many of them work through the density bonus. You could really ask for any kind of modification or waiver if you are willing to provide the minimum amount of affordable housing. Waivers from the density, or from the density and any zoning provisions. There's also some provisions in the code already about transit, proximity to transit around parking. There's a framework there to begin thinking about if there's options to do that. But I think we want to take a really serious step back and look at this, look at what other cities have done, see what options are on the table, and have a robust conversation about this.
So just to, again, it's going to be part of the formal report, but if the department could at least give us sort of a high-level perspective as to sort of what we know from the code enforcement program, and what is it that we have found out there? How many units have we sort of been out there? How many, do you have some general observations as to how many are, sort of, 100-unit type buildings, or some that are only 3 or 4 units? I mean, just some of your initial sort of thoughts on what we know.
Could I
Sure.
add in here? We're at a press conference on Monday with the mayor. There's going to be mandates on retrofit. So this might be something that people think about, that if there's some way we can weave those two, there may be funding that's available for retrofit that also brings units into compliance.
Yeah.
Again, Domingo Salcedo with the housing, with the HCID code enforcement program. What the inspectors do under the systematic inspection program is identify these types of violations, these illegal units, through their systematic inspection process. As a matter of fact, just in the last 4 years, we've cited about 2,400 illegal units in the city of Los Angeles, and most of them are the 3 units and over types of buildings. Once we cite these buildings, we make the
attention, or just on your, this is coming to your attention by just disgruntled individuals, or part of your regular survey, or how does
This is part of the regular survey. In some cases, we do have some complaints, but mostly as part of the systematic inspection process. We go out there within 3 to 4 years and inspect all these units, all these apartments.
Take a second to sort of explain this, the systematic code enforcement program, because it's been a little while since I've been familiar with it. These are units that you go and inspect on a regular basis about every 3 years or so, because they are part of our rent stabilization program. Is that right?
That's correct, yes. All these apartment buildings that are 2 units and over, our inspection program is designed to inspect once every 3 to 4 years. At this level, at this time, we're at a 4-year cycle, but we go systematically and inspect every one of these buildings that are rented or offered for rent. In the process, we inspect for all the violations, habitability violations, code violations, and we identify these violations and instruct them, order them to make the repairs. Illegal units, once we identify them, we instruct the owners or order the owners to either remove them and comply, or go to building and safety and obtain the proper permits and inspections and approvals to get these buildings legalized. As I mentioned, most of the buildings that we've inspected are 3 units, 3 units and over, and 2 units on the lot are about 40%, and the rest of them are about 60%. So for the most part, we see the types of violations that we see is maybe just 1 unit that's being converted illegally in each one of these buildings.
And so, just to sort of come back to the code enforcement program for a second, so these are folks that are the universe of that you're speaking to is something that we go out there on a regular basis.
That's correct.
And I think it's really important to sort of note, colleagues, that as a result of the funding shortfalls in the city of Los Angeles, we have not kept up with our systematic code enforcement obligation to get out there very often. And I think this probably doesn't happen very much, but there is a sort of business model that you could sort of take on, where if the enforcement and the review of these buildings aren't for 5 or 6 years because of the budgetary impacts that we've got, that some folks may, sort of game the system. And I think that's something that we need to sort of pay attention to. So as we begin to look at next year's budget, we are taking into account the implications of not fully funding the code enforcement program. That really is our sort of backstop to make sure that life and safety isn't being compromised. So 60% of the units or so that are in the code enforcement program are units, or I should say dwellings, that are 3 or more units.
That's correct.
And so there's something that's interesting. And in your experience is that we're finding when they get snared in all of this that it's one unit that is illegal and not conforming.
Yeah,
thereabouts, for the most part.
Yes, sir, for the most part. They're either converting the rec room or the laundry room into a dwelling unit.
And so I think that's where it's going to get really difficult for us as we craft a policy or look at a pilot program, because it says that 40% of the remainder is in units or dwellings that are 2 or fewer units, which to me sort of, my intuition would say that the envelope or the parcel or the land use designation might be tougher to squeeze sort of some legal way to conform. But I think that's where the fun and the magic's going to be when you all come back and sort of say, here's what we think we can sort of offer depending on the universe that folks find themselves in, if they're 3 or more or 3 or less. And so the data that you've got here, how many, I see that we circulated a chart here, how many sort of total units are out there that you are monitoring?
Well, as I mentioned, at this point we have, we've cited 2,300, but at this point we have about, combined with the RSO and non-RSO, a total of about 4,400.
And you're getting to those every 3, every 4, these days 5 years?
Close, yeah, 4 years and slightly a little bit over because we've had an issue with hiring some of the staff.
Okay. And so any sort of ideas on how, and I'm eager to get to the report, obviously, but any ideas as to how you'll sort of craft a strategy for us or a sort of pilot program? I mean, obviously, we've got to work with sort of this initially, but it'd be my hope that once we get to a place where we have a rubric of things that sort of are acceptable for us in changing from illegal to conforming units, that we'd be able to sort of open it up. And so I'm looking at it in phases, but any sense as to how long it would take to fully sort of get a good back-of-the-envelope estimate as to how to address this universe?
Again, as I think you mentioned with regards to the Department of Building and Safety, our main concern is the public safety, either fire safety or life and exits requirements where people are required to exit the buildings. Those are our main concerns. So as far as identifying which buildings have the priority, we'd have to identify the level of safety and risk to these tenants.
Tell us a little bit about what happens today. So you find a unit that's not conforming. I have to imagine there's a whole range of things that the owner can do, but what happens in the worst case and in the best case scenarios?
Well, in the worst case scenario, we find that there's an immediate threat to life and safety. We may go as far as issuing a vacate if we determine that the people's lives are in immediate danger. We may vacate the unit and order the owner to relocate the tenants. That would be the worst case scenario. In a best case scenario, we'd find that the building is probably, and we did have in one particular case where an illegal unit was actually in front of one of those homeowner magazines as a model, because it was just fantastically built. It was beautiful, but at the same time it was done without permits. Where we issued the owner an owner's order, requiring them to either go to the Department of Building and Safety and obtain the permits and approvals, or return it to its approved use. The owners always have that option when we're out there and cite these tenants to do either remove it or, again, get the approvals from the Department of Building and Safety. And we do have a particular number that we've found so far, where the percentage of illegal units that are legalized is just 9% for the most part. The illegal units that are removed is about 55%. And the other remaining units are either in the process of being legalized or prosecuted or in some other advanced enforcement.
So 55% of the time, you can get these folks off the list and conform their use?
Yes, because they'll either remove it or return it back to its approved use.
Okay, all right, very good. Colleagues?
Mr. Rice?
No, I think this is it's an important area. I mean, the numbers don't lie. CD9's got a tremendous number of illegal units.
That's correct, yes.
And just sort of piggybacking on the previous conversation, equally problematic, obviously, are the garages and the other illegal structures that have resulted in deaths and real problems. So I'm anxious for us to move forward on this as soon as possible and to figure out how we make it a win-win, working closely with the landlords, with the apartment, with the property owners, so they can convert it legally, and we can work with them because there's a definite shortage of housing. I mean, this isn't occurring just because people choosing to live this way. They don't have any options, and so I think we have an obligation, a responsibility to do all we can to provide additional housing and work with the property owners and tenants to make these properties legal the best way we can in a way that doesn't sacrifice their health or safety or that of the community. So the numbers are sobering. The chair and I were just commiserating that between our two districts, it's almost a quarter of this number.
25%.
That's just unacceptable. So, thank you. So we got to do better.
I'll note, Mr. Fuentes, Mr. Millman, that we will follow this work with the...
seismic retrofit.
Well, we've got to think about that. I mean, that's going to be on the agenda, but also we're going to look at single units as well, family units as well.
Oh, right.
The granny flats.
Right.
So that'll be coming shortly. Okay? Ready to move your...
Yeah, so again, let me just thank the stakeholders for their participation. Honestly, this is something that is long overdue and clearly predates colleagues, all of us, but it's fallen upon us to try to figure out how to come up with a policy that, as we hear back the staff's recommendations and in the report on how it is that we proceed in a way that is meaningful but is also balanced, because again, this isn't sort of catch as catch can here, amnesty. This is really making sure that we can conform units, bring them up to code, make sure that they're safe, but also that it's fair, because there are many folks who have sort of, with full knowledge, have done sort of what they were supposed to, and in many cases it's my feeling that a lot of these owners inherited some of these problems, and we want to figure out how to sort of clean everything up. And so your report and recommendations are something I'm very excited about and can't wait to read, and I understand it's going to be fairly detailed. It's going to take a lot of sort of collaboration and honestly probably a lot of give from the planning department, because we're going to have to figure out how to exercise those density bonuses, because I think the hard part here is going to be probably parking in a lot of these situations, but we will see in short order. So I wanted to thank you, Mr. Chair, for allowing me to present on this along with staff, and I look forward to hearing from the staff, and I think, Mr. Chair, that there might be an additional card that was not...
Yes, there's one card. I've got...
I'm sorry, that's not mine, but I did have something to add, if you would.
I've got Gloria.
I just wondered, most of my thoughts were presented by the other gentleman.
Okay.
I just wanted to ask if there were places that had, like, a long time ago in their different administration and housing, certificates of
occupancy.
Or housing registrations were given to some units that might have been illegal. Can that be taken into consideration?
Yes.
So it's our intention to, you can't be legal without a certificate of occupancy, and so the forensics on all of this is going to have to necessitate, in many cases, looking at what the original C of O said and then figuring out where we are. And the hard part here is that, we also shouldn't necessitate brand new plans for a project that maybe only needs a little tweaking. So the finessing here is going to really be at the department level to understand how it is that we sort of thread that needle, because it's not rebuilding an entire building, it's conforming one, and that's going to take a lot of creativity from staff. But I think, Mr. Clark, you had a comment. Mr. Chair, if it's okay, if you can come up to the microphone so this way we record your comment. I don't know that you had a chance to use your full minute.
I'll just ask the chair if that's okay.
It's fine.
Thank you. Something that I missed, and I just remembered. If we're committed to this, and I think we all are, is there a way that we can make some sort of amendment to the motion that there be a moratorium on the order of these units either being changed or closed while we write the ordinance?
Well, so if I could, I think what we need to do is hear from the staff sort of what their proposed prescription is for remedy. I don't know that we can or should afford folks a stay on enforcement because we don't know sort of what's out there. And so I think what will be very important here is that clearly we have, with my colleagues agree, you'll have an action today to ask for a report, and presumably whenever we start this pilot program, we will memorialize sort of today's date and the conversation so that if folks get snared in the middle of all of this, we can figure it out. But I'd be very nervous about setting a moratorium that potentially could lead to life and safety issues out there. So I don't know that I could support your amendment. Not to mention you're not on this side of the table, you're on that side.
No, I totally understand.
So you can't amend my motion.
Yeah, I understand that. I was asking for one, but I understand the inspections could move forward, and citations being done that, but the closure and or putting them back. That's what I was saying. Is maybe we put the brakes on that while we write the ordinance, because again, these units have been occupied sometimes for 20, 30 years, and we don't want to see them lost while we're doing this good deed, if you will.
Sure. I don't think that, and building and safety can correct me here because they are, and housing, actually the enforcement arms. I don't know that you're going to see a lot of closure on sort of, whatever is in sort of at the prosecution stage. I don't think we have the ability to sort of pull back. But we do have an opportunity, though, as folks are remediating their issues, to sort of look at the work that we're crafting here and see if we can pull those folks in, which is why we're starting with.
Fair enough.
Yeah. But I can't imagine that we're going to get a lot of cases sort of closed and adjudicated in the next 60 days, which is my expectation to sort of see some product come back.
Okay, thank you.
All righty. Thank you.
Thank you.
So we move.
Yeah. So I'd ask for an aye vote.
Move the recommendation.
I'll second it.
Oh, aye.
Second. Okay. So be the order.
Mr. Chair, that concludes the regular scheduled meeting. Sorry.
Mr. Chair, we have general public comment cards.
Before we go to item 7.
Correct.
Okay. General public comment. Yolanda Gonzalez. Bill Huey. And Michael Millman.
Yeah.
Mr. Chair, Kate might have lost my voice.
Okay.
Happy
What?
holidays.
Go, Bill.
You want me to go first? Okay. I'm Bill Huey, President of Fair Housing Coalition. There are some things that have come to my attention that the LHD is doing really bad. It borders on criminal. I write for the AOA magazine. It goes out to 100,000 landlords. It influences a lot of people, a lot of voters, a lot of contributors. I'd like to interview anyone on this committee who will consent to an interview. I have some information I want to present and find out where the committee's at. I just came from an inspection on Alvarado Street where the landlord sued the housing department and won in court. The housing department retributed by bringing in the health department, 4 inspectors, and 2 LAPD, and our lawyer had signs on the doors where tenant said, I don't want you coming into my apartment. It's already been inspected. Leave me alone. They brought a locksmith in to break the locks. People were horrified seeing the police and 4 inspectors walking in. This is like stormtroopers. This is what they're doing at the housing department. They might not be telling you, but I got it on video, and when this hits the media, it's going to look really bad.
Thank you.
Okay. If anybody wants to give me an interview, raise your hand. I'll give you my card.
Yolanda Gonzalez.
Yes, Yolanda Gonzalez, member of the coalition that Bill Huey has, and property owner in Boyle Heights and in Venice. We need to really come down to solving our homeless problem. It's sad to see young ladies that are sleeping in the street as I was walking down one of my streets in Venice. You guys have to come up with a very good solution. We have 7 or 8 assembly members that came down from Sacramento, joined our city council, and we can't get anything on the books or a recommendation as to solving this problem. It is sad that we have to put up now cameras. We were just robbed. We were attacked. I mean, the police cannot keep up with the incidents that we are having, as well as in Boyle Heights, as well in Venice. You guys have to really use your brains and work together to see how we can solve our homeless problem.
Okay, that concludes the meeting. Now we can go to special item number 7.
Item 7 is a Los Angeles Housing Community Investment Department report relative to options for other funding sources to address the loss of federal funding for the city's community-based development organizations.
Good afternoon. Ed Gibson from Housing Community Investment Department. Back in November, we had a discussion about, one, the loss of CDBOs and our inability to use exceed the service cap of 15%, inability to use the CDBO model any longer to fund services in the city. At the end of that meeting and the discussion, which also revolved around nurses and basically the challenges with them, but more so that they would not help us resolve this issue. They could help us be focused in investment, but wouldn't resolve the services issue. The committee asked for some ideas and options, and so forthwith, I've brought forth some items for discussion. And then the report basically looks back and asks the CAO and CLA to comment. I'll start with the first one, which is probably a challenging one to say the least, but it does have some possibility. So it is to request that we basically declare a homeless emergency. As we've had civil unrest in the past and our service cap went from 15 to 25% under those circumstances, forthwith we should make the case that, one, we're the homeless capital of the nation. 2, we've been asked to resolve homelessness inside the city. We know we have some commitments somehow that the federal government's going to help, but we don't have basically the way that they're going to do that yet. And so if we could put forth a claim, declare the homeless emergency, request that the service cap be moved from 15 to 25%, it would provide us the additional flexibility to provide services in the city. What will be interesting here is, as we do resolve some of the homelessness issues already in the city, those people will start moving into our traditional service system. They'll start showing up in our family source centers and other things because they're going to need the support network. We're going to see them one way or the other. But this actually provides us an opportunity to continue to use our CDBG in a way to provide those services. And I'm happy to go into any level of detail you want with that.
Mr. Chairman?
Yeah.
Has that been, that kind of emergency been declared before? I mean, has HUD recognized that, or are we charting some new ground by creating this emergency?
We're going to quasi-tread a little bit of new ground. So when we had civil unrest, we got that cap increased. And so it wasn't specific to homelessness. As was pointed out to me earlier by Ruth Schwartz, there was a time when the city was basically designated like a homeless initiative city, one of a handful back a while ago, and additional resources came in for that. Here we're making a different kind of case, specifically saying this homeless crisis is an emergency, and we need to provide this assistance. I'm not saying it's a home run hit, but I think there's a lot of pieces we can put to support that. The uniqueness that the city no other city in the nation has this many homeless. So the precedent that gets set isn't like one that someone's going to copy and use in another way. There's been, a very big claim to resolve homelessness, and so we're asking for the federal government's help. And we're not technically asking them for any more money. We're asking for flexibility in the use of our money.
I like that idea.
When we actually go back and look at the CDBG calculation and even the ESG calculation, if you will, that the West Coast, because of the age of its housing stock, already gets less money with regard to CDBG than a lot of the nation because of the way the formula is calculated. So I think there's a lot of ways we can make this kind of firm it up and help them justify without setting some type of precedent that the whole nation would be like, hey, I want to do that too. But we're in a very unique spot. We're in a very unique spot.
I'd be interested, obviously, in follow-up on this, how this gets done, how this gets executed.
So General Manager Rushmore Cervantes and I, we had a quick call with the local office of HUD. And through those discussions, I think the path that we're prepared to discuss is that the mayor's office write the letter directly to the Secretary of HUD. I think we also need to make the council motion, if you will, underneath that we are declaring an emergency and this is an urgent matter so that the city is unified in its efforts and we build this case and we start at that point. I think that's the kicker.
Yeah.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
On this point, I actually, of all of the recommendations, think this is the most solid, provided that we're not trying to sort of figure out how to, from an accounting perspective, justify the service that we currently provide. I think in order for this to be meaningful, we're going to have to really change how it is that we fund some programs. And I couldn't agree with you more that, if we were successful in, some early phases of curing this crisis, then we would necessitate probably some additional FSC-type service delivery. But at the outset, I think that separate and aside, and respectfully to the mayor's office, we're going to need more than just a letter. I think we're going to need a real plan for how it is that if we were given the latitude and flexibility, how we would partner with the county, how we would incentivize some additional housing stock, specifically permanent supportive housing stock. We would really have to, I think, come up with a fairly solid plan that we communicate to HUD and say, here's what we will do if we're given the flexibility. And I actually think that we ask for more because there isn't, I think, enough that we could do in real short order to demonstrate some success. Because I think, to be honest, we'd also have to, I think the recommendation was ask for 5 years, or I read that somewhere. We'd have to really sort of say, here is a plan that we think we can execute in this amount of time, and please give us the opportunity. I think that then becomes very real. But you mentioned at the outset that you think this is hard. What is it that you think would make this difficult? Because I think it's clear, it's not creating. We have a crisis in the county of Los Angeles. What do you think sort of the stumbling blocks would be?
I think it's because we're going to need the approval at the highest level. We know that the local HUD offices in the jurisdictions don't have this authority, and if you ask them, they're not going to be able to give it to you, so you get a no. So that we may have to make sure that we've done everything that you've mentioned, which is build the case and build the plan. 5 years, most things are done in HUD in 5 years. Our comm plan is done in 5 years, so it does imply a plan. My apologies for not being clear on that. So it's just making sure that we make that case and make that case clearly, but then making sure that it's fully within, I want to hope the HUD secretary's full abilities to approve, that we don't have to go any further to legislators, if you will, because if we have to go past that to Congress or something, we're going to have a different kind of issue.
Sure. No, I think we're going to have to operate under the discretion of the Secretary of the Housing and Urban Development Department. But I think the evidence is absolutely clear. The litigation alone, most recently on sort of Skid Row, the article after article of sort of, the situation in the streets where we can't, we shouldn't say we can't, the City of Los Angeles has struggled to provide adequate resources for folks who need to use bathrooms and this sort of thing. I think there is overwhelming evidence that we're in a state of emergency. And to me, that seems to be the most viable of all of these. I know that you're going to go through them, but when you get to the ones about sort of the fees and this sort of thing, I'm not a huge fan of billboards per se, but I don't know how you make the nexus from billboards to CDBG type service delivery. So I'd love to know how it is that we're going to do that.
Absolutely, and I'm happy to get to that too.
Speaking of nexus, would this then not restrict all the resources to specific homeless services, the declaration of the homeless.
Just ask for an increase in the service cap based on a crisis that we're having. It would not negate the fact that we still have to provide services. I would say a great deal of the services in some form or fashion will overlap. You know, the same issues that the lower economic families are suffering, the newly housed, formerly homeless, are going to actually have the exact same issues. I think the real challenge is they're going to actually need more personalized attention inside that. We have certain types of service coming from homeless and the ESG dollars that come from HUD, but we also are going to have a new kind of influx of people who are going to need support. And we know it's going to impact our system, because as more come in, they're going to be on that lower rung and they're going to need those services anyway. So the question is how are we going to pay for them? And if we can get ahead of this curve, increase the services citywide, and perhaps save some of those from falling into this practice, help those who are coming out of that practice, we're going better off. You mentioned something very interesting, and there's a little side note about, about needing more than just service dollars, CDBG capital, and perhaps home, and I'm in full agreement with you. And we put that comment there, and we put it in parentheses for a reason. Didn't want to lose too much focus on what our end game and our first goal was trying to be, which is to deal with the service cap issue. But unequivocally, we need an increase in the home dollars. It would be helpful to have an absolute increase in the CDBG dollars. But that's based on a formula, and that formula would need so much approval from so many legislative places that if we start to add it into the problem, then, or as part of the solution, we start to lose our solution as an option. So I wanted us thinking about it, but I didn't want it in the forefront too far.
The other thing, just before I forget it, the foreclosure settlement as more evidence of sort of the need for, not just sort of service delivery for formerly homeless, but stabilization before we lose any more people to homelessness. I mean, I would love to be a part of the grant writing or the program writing team here, because I mean, we're absolutely ripe for this type of declaration. Sorry, go ahead.
Mr. Rice?
No, I said I think I like the idea, and I think it certainly addresses an issue that we are grappling with in the city: homelessness. We're the homeless capital, and as we have success in Skid Row, we need more resources in District 9,
everywhere,
and everywhere else. And so I think it's a kind of inventive strategy that might work.
Hopefully so.
What would be the timetable on that? We're looking at a date. When do these cuts? Would these cuts come into play?
The April 1, so the upcoming comp plan year, which would begin April 1, which will be in full discussion here in January about. So
you've got to pull this off in the next 4 months? 5 months?
Less, because we got to get to the
We'll make that full
HUD.
We'll have to make a full court press
Right.
and support it. And there's a part of me that we'll have those discussions about how we pre-flight it a little bit to see how best to send the scenario up there without, causing all the alarms.
This is something that the secretary could approve within.
We're going to need the secretary.
Her discretion, obviously, to
Yes.
approve.
We want to balance where it is in their in his discretion to assist us with this.
What are the other recommendations here before we sort of
So,
hijack just the report for one
Yeah,
solution?
so B and C are the ones we actually discussed before about some of the partnerships, looking more at the county and where we can partner. Most of our service providers already have relationships with the county, so seeing where they could be expanded, where things are where we're losing dollars now. The other one was also partnering with intermediaries, LISC, enterprise, entities such as that, and seeing where we might be able to work together in those regards. And then, even the most unique one, which is we actually have the partnership with LAUSD, which put the counselor types inside the family source centers, and so that brought forth resources as well in an unusual partnership that works very well. So seeing if we can identify some more of those, which those discussions have begun in various forms already.
How do we enhance those connections?
Well, a lot of those are having a great deal of conversations, one with the county, one with the service providers. So there's been several of those meetings already. And then just basically trying to think outside the box a little bit. quite honestly. I can't say there's one great path to it. But if everybody starts thinking this is what we want to do, those ideas will start coming forward a little bit more clearly. So, item D was taking a look at where departments that might be general funded or have funds from another source other than CDBG are actually benefiting from a CDBG funded service, and perhaps that is the offset item to them. So if we were thinking of LAPD and some of their funding and some of their services, how they deal with domestic violence and the services that are supported, in those transactions that go, those service providers are helping provide a service, but they're all being paid out of CDBG. And so it would require a look from CAO and CLA to take a look at where there might be some nexus between how those funding sources might work. So it's a little beyond the department's look.
And at this point, are you talking to other groups that are looking at cuts?
Oh, we've spoken to everybody about the cuts a while ago. Yes, sir. We've called every single.
Are you
yes.
matching them up? Or you talked about the county, them improving their connections with the county. Are you convening them, or do you plan to convene them?
For an example of the family source, well, all the service providers were brought in. So I've spoken to the domestic violence folks about Nexus, where you provide services. The family source centers and the departments had the meeting with the county. We've had the meeting with LISC, perhaps. Well, not perhaps. We had the meeting with LISC. It just happened to work out that EWDD might get some benefit of that meeting more than we will. So they actually found a little nexus that might work for them, which is fine. So somebody in the city is going to benefit from that. So yes, those have started. And then, of course, we do have the partnership already secured with LAUSD, and it's in place. So working through those nexus, needing that assistance. So item E, which is basically consideration of general fund revenues and or redevelopment boomerang funds, and setting a portion of those aside, which is clearly CAO, CLA assistance, if we were going to look at that route. And then the last two are two different things, a little bit tied together. So we know more billboard sign districts will come together, and you're asking about the nexus. And so we know that the billboards, historically, it's the community around them that's actually hating the billboard. So why not make some benefit back to the community from the billboard? And so these services benefit the entire community, depending on where you're located. So making that nexus, this is impacting negatively the community. Let's tie it back to some type of services that support the community is the nexus that we're trying to go to. One was taking a portion of any billboard district fee coming through and assigning that to services. But the other one was we had the city council had the conversation about increasing the fees for illegal billboards inside the city. So if there was that consideration, and let's say that fee, that additional increase in fee was passed, that would be a completely new revenue source to the city. It would be tied back to, will these illegal billboards impact the city negatively in certain communities, that it's tied back to services of the community. So at least you're getting some good for the challenge of what the issue is. It's a new income stream, so you're not going to affect the current budget. So it provides another way just to actually do a cash infusion without misdirecting to something else or redirecting.
We haven't been very successful in court in dealing with these matters.
Yeah.
Want to spend somebody else's money and then have to pay them back.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, sir.
I just to comment on this, I think that I know my colleague kind of expressed some reservation in that as a technique or as a tool. But for some areas, it might make some sense. I think about my district, and we got the freeway runs all the way through it. And if there were some billboard activity along there, it definitely would benefit if those resources could be targeted for homeless needs. It could definitely be a benefit. And as you say, it's a new stream of income that could be dedicated for that purpose.
Yeah. And it's, the incremental difference. I mean, there's a portion that comes into the general fund already, but that incremental difference is all new money.
Right.
Yeah. So it's what's in your control, what's not.
At this point, I don't think we should rule anything out. So,
Mr. Fuentes.
So any sort of, I guess where I get nervous is that anything billboard related seems to take decades in the city of Los Angeles to regulate. And the conversation, at least the way I understand it, it's that we are trying to, at least endeavoring to reduce the square footage of billboards out there, which would, I think, mean that you'd have a shrinking fee if that's what we were trying to do. Because it's what I hear is that the transformation from sort of static to electronic, we'd have to shrink, I think, in order to deal with it. But I just don't know how you predicate this type of sort of revenue stream on all of that uncertainty in addition to illegal billboards, because presumably if we deem them illegal, then they need to come down. And so it'd be a one-time sort of revenue solution, to use some CAO parlance for a second here, for an ongoing service delivery need. So to me, funding the FSC or the CBDOs, it doesn't
services, yeah.
Yeah, it doesn't seem sort of practical or at least certain enough for me to be excited about it. I don't know what the chair's pleasure is going to be, but I really do think that we need to be as forceful as possible as it relates to trying to craft a program that we can send a trial balloon to HUD to see if we can really expand our service delivery situation and have a real honest game plan for a strategy to attack homelessness, because I think the service delivery that we do now fits perfectly in those solutions. And to me, that's, as difficult as it is, I think it's probably the option that I like an awful lot. I will say for the record, I know that we have had the conversation about the boomerang funds as a dedicated stream of revenue for the affordable housing fund.
Portion of.
And there hasn't been a decision, but I hate to sort of poke holes, and I don't intend this to be a Swiss cheese sort of exercise, but we need to sort of make sure we don't lose that conversation either. So it keeps pointing me back to A.
Yeah. Oh, no quibbles or qualms about whether you like A,
Sure.
B, C, or D. A list of options was requested. A list of options was provided.
And I thank you for it.
I will. Go ahead.
I don't see is options from the state of California, legislative options. State is robust. We have new leadership in the President Pro Tem's office, and we have a governor who was a former mayor of a city that had the same challenges.
Yeah.
Right, and an advocate for the poor in the legislature. It seems a perfect storm there for us to take advantage of that.
I think so. I think there's that opportunity that's there. We, particularly in the department, deal more with the federal funds, and we were having a very express federal fund conversation in the past. I'm not sure quite what the path would be at the top of my head at this moment off of the state. Just looking at some of the challenges, we do have some great support up there now. It's basically how to figure out how they can get us some support along the way, and perhaps if they would just get behind the homeless aspect of what we're talking about, which is what I was thinking of earlier.
Yeah.
But I couldn't figure out how to get that nexus in my head just yet, quite honestly. So yes, I would not rule that off the table. I did just want to comment on the billboard issue, because you all are right. Legal billboards, taking down billboards, huge challenge. But I believe, and someone needs to correct me if my belief is wrong, that we do collect illegal fees now on billboards. What we can't seem to be able to do is make them come down or make them stop. And right now, it's actually cheaper to pay us and leave the billboard up. And since we are already operating under that premise, and probably will be for a while just because of legal circumstances and challenges, that's where my thought process was about, particularly if you just say you just doubled the illegal fee for billboards, for legal billboards. You'd have more funds. You haven't fixed the problem because you haven't won the court cases yet, which are going to drag out for a while, but you have increased the revenues, and they're still going to pay, because those signs make a lot of money. It's an astounding effort. That's my thought about that. You're right. But I figured it would be hanging around for quite a while, honestly.
Yeah, before we go to public let's go to public comment. Nancy Volpert, Eve Sheedy, and then Ruth.
No, you go ahead.
Hello again. Thank you for having us back and for having this very important conversation. We've talked about the costs of domestic violence before and the need for emergency shelter and how emergency shelter is part of what prevents homelessness. But I just thought there have been two examples this week that are incredibly painful reminders of what domestic violence does to our community and how everybody is at risk. I'm sure you've seen the headlines. There was a murder-suicide at Park La Brea of a young dancer shot and killed by her husband. There was a car crash yesterday.
Who also committed suicide.
Who also committed suicide. And there was a car crash yesterday where a father who was in a bitter custody battle with his ex-wife chose as a response to drive his car into a semi-truck and kill himself and his two young children. Domestic violence is a painful, costly problem.
Good afternoon. My name is Eve Sheedy. I'm the chair of the city's Domestic Violence Task Force, which is the coalition of service providers and public representatives. I just want to sort of underscore both what Nancy's saying with regards to the domestic violence service providers. Given that Chief Beck has recently acknowledged a 20% increase, every other city agency looks to the shelter providers to solve the problem. They make resource lists, they suggest apps, and so on. So these service providers, the 10 funded agencies, are really providing the safety net not only for the DV victims, but for the other city departments. I also want to say that the majority of homeless women are domestic violence victims, so you're dealing with the same population, and urge you to continue to find funding within the city to support these agencies.
Hi, Ruth Schwartz, Shelter Partnership. I just want to speak to the issue of the CD homeless. I think, just to speak again about CDBGs, Columbus, Ohio gets 6 times what we get in per capita homeless person because of the formula. And the formula is really flawed. And, I think that we're totally under-resourced here. I'd really like to work with you on that proposal that HCID has. What we need is resources. It's not all about system design, as some would suggest. We've seen a 25% decrease in veterans homelessness. That's because we got federal resources. It's almost unit to unit equal to the reduction in veterans homelessness. And we've seen a 25% in homeless families as well because we've coordinated our resources. And if I can just take a couple extra seconds. I think I want to suggest a couple other things to you. One is that there's a new board of supervisors, and it's time to talk to them about boomerang funds and other resources. They have a giant surplus that you don't have, and they've been saving that money for a lot of different things, including labor negotiations. And you're the folks that can have those conversations with those new members about what the priorities should be, because they're in a good situation because they haven't used resources. And I think it's about time, that be called out. And then the other thing is there are a number of county departments or county affiliated departments that are talking about reducing direct services, don't want to do them anymore, want to go more into a different kind of a mode. And I'd like to have conversations with you all about that, and especially for young children. And I think, so if you're looking for them to help you, you're going to have to do a lot more than previous councils have done to have those conversations with your counterparts to make that occur. So, and then on the state thing, I think there are things. The state did do some things this year. Tony Atkins did make $20 million available for homeless families and rapid rehousing. It was kind of a secret in the budget that she got in. So there's an opening there and I think she's wanting to do it again. But to involve you all more in those conversations would be great. So thank you.
All right. So we want to recommend that H should report back in 30 days, put some meat on these plans. Keep in mind what we'd like is a plan that has a timeline, because the cuts are coming if we don't have a solution in lieu of. And so we want to report back in 30 days, detailed plan on the items A through D. We also want you to add to that report back on possible state resources and county resources. We want you to work with the CLA specifically on the process and next steps for all these items, including but not limited to item A. Okay?
Mr. Chair, I'm sorry. Will this item continue in committee, or are you sending it forward to council?
No, we'll continue the item.
Thank you.
Cool. Is that it?
That concludes the agenda.
Thank you. Everybody have a great day and have a great, is this it for the year? Is this it for the year? And everybody have a great holiday.